All right, guys. So yesterday we were talking about graphs being proportional and how we tell, and we saw some that were not proportional. Now today we are going to get more into the not proportional side. Now I told you when we're talking about information that's not proportional, it can still be a line, but we don't call it the constant of proportionality anymore. It can still be the constant rate of change. But it's also called the slope. So now the equation we're going to be using, instead of y equals kx, we are now moving into y equals mx plus b. So you could look at the m as what was our k, but now we're saying plus b because it's not always going to go through the origin. So the m is your slope. This is your slope or your rate of change. And then B is called your y-intercept. Now, I talked to you about y-intercepts when we were looking at graphing, and I said, remember that term because we're going to use it a lot when we get to lines. Because the y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. So this is the point that the line crosses the y-axis. Okay, so we talked about that. I gave you that definition, and I said this is going to come back after Christmas break, and here it is. Okay, so now what we're going to do today is we're going to review a little bit about input and output, which we did before Christmas break, because you're going to be using that a lot now with this. And then we're going to look at, in your guided practice, we're going to look at some problems where you have to compare two sets of information. One may be proportional, one may not be, and you have to decide which one is the best deal, when will they be equal, things of that nature. So, but before we do that, we're going to review your input and your output. We talked about these terms before Christmas. They're also known as your independent and dependent, your X and your Y. So remember, your input is always your X value, and then the output is always your Y value. So if we have a table, we've done this several times. Remember back when we were doing equations and inequalities, and they said, does this number set satisfy this inequality or these inequalities, and you set up a table and you had to do each inequality or each number? That's the same thing. We're going to set it up in a table though. So we're going to have our X's here, so our input here. We're going to have our equation here. And then we're going to have our Y value, our output values. Now, we get to choose these most of the time. Sometimes they'll give them to us. So, but then other times we get to choose them. So then there's what we're going to work on today. They give you some, and then there's some you get to choose what you want. Okay. So we get to choose. Sometimes they choose for us. So now let me get another color. All right. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to give you the equation. We're just going to make y equals 2x plus 3. Now, look at these two pieces. Y equals mx plus b. So whatever's in front of the x is your slope or your rate of change. So my slope is a positive 2. Now remember, when we have whole numbers, that's the same thing as 2 over 1. That's going to come in handy down the road. And then plus b, which is my y-intercept. Some people are like, why don't they use y? Well, because they use y over here for your y-coordinate. They can't use y twice. So they use b for y-intercept. So that means that it crosses the y-axis at 3. Not at 0, 0, at 3 on the y-axis. Remember, y-axis is your vertical. It goes up and down. So at 3 is where it crosses. Now, let's do our input-output chart. So usually when I'm doing these, I like to pick some negative numbers and some positive numbers. That way I see what it's doing on both sides of the graph. So I'm going to start with -2, and then I'm going to do -1. I always do 0. And then I'm going to do 1, and then I'm going to do 2. So I usually try to do the same amount on either side of 0. Now I want to show you something about 0 in a second. All right, so now what do we do now? Remember, you take these values that you just wrote down, and you're going to substitute them right here for x, because that's what x is. Remember, we've done this several times. So y equals 2. Now, what is my first x? -2. And then plus 3. So 2 times -2 is -4 plus 3. My signs are different, so you subtract and you keep the sign of the larger number, so it's -1. So if my input is -2, my output is -1. And then we do the same thing for the next one. So y equals 2. Now instead of -2, I'm now using -1 plus 3. That plus 3 never changes. So that gives me -2 plus 3. My signs are still different. So I still subtract, but now my answer is going to be a +1. So if my input is -1, my output is +1. Now let's look at 0. So y equals 2 times 0 plus 3. Anything times 0 is 0. 0 plus 3 is 3. Now, I always pick 0 because I know this is going to give me my y-intercept. Okay? So, did I technically have to do this? No, my y-intercept is 3. So, if my x is 0, my y is 3. It tells me that right there. But if you plug it in, anytime you plug in 0, the output will always be where it crosses the y-axis. Okay, so this right here, anytime x is 0, when we're talking about lines, okay, this is your y-intercept. So even if you don't remember here, if you plug 0 in, you will get your y-intercept. But if you really need to remember that this number tacked on is your y-intercept, because then when you look at your, like if you're doing a test, you can automatically know which answers make sense based on what your y-intercept is. And we'll look at that in just a little bit. All right, so now let's continue. Let's finish our chart. So now we have y equals, now I'm doing +1 plus 3. 2 times 1 is 2. Plus 3. My signs are the same now, so I add and I keep my sign. So it's a 5. So if my input is 1, my output is 5. And then I do the same thing for this one. So y equals 2 times 2 plus 3. 2 times 2 is 4. Plus 3. Signs are the same. Add and keep signs, so it's 7. So when my input is 2, my output is 7. Now remember, these numbers give you your ordered pairs that you graph. So remember, x is always first. So -2, -1. That's your coordinate. That is what you would graph. And then this one is -1, 1. This one I'm going to write over here. So 0, 3. It's special. That's my y-intercept, so it's going to be over here by itself. This one is 1, 5. and this one is 2, 7. So remember, what does that mean? This one right here means I go to the left because it's negative, so I go to the left, 2 spaces, and then down 1. Here I go left 1 space, and I go up 1. Here I stay on the origin, but then I move up 3. Here I go to the right 1 and up 5. Here I go to the right 2 and up 7. Okay? So that, remember, is how we would plug numbers in for input and output. And like I said, I'm reviewing this because we're going to be using this a lot. You're going to have to get really good at this. Okay? You're going to have to. So it's very imperative that we look at it again. Y'all did well with it before Christmas, but I know, y'all hadn't thought about math since last year. Anyway. Okay. So now we're going to move to our guided practice, and I'm going to show you how to look at different graphs, both proportional and not proportional, and be able to find information for those graphs. All right. So I will see you on the slide.